We spoke with writer-author Erik Bork about his new movie, The Elephant in the Room, a romantic comedy about a couple who finds love despite being on opposite sides of the political aisle. We asked Erik to break down the screenplay using the teachings from his 2018 book, The Idea, the 7 Elements of a Viable Story for Screen, Stage, or Fiction.
Erik, I wanted to see if we could take your highly successful book, The Idea, which we've already mentioned, and now your new movie that you just completed, The Elephant in the Room. And I'm just wondering, how much did you lean into your own teachings from The Idea with this new movie of yours?
Well, I think that the ideas in the book, The Idea that I wrote, are things I've arrived at over time from my own writing and my own experiences in Hollywood, as well as reading a lot of other writers' scripts as a paid consultant and coach and professor and teacher of screenwriting. And so those things are just innate to me now that they've always been there, and they got solidified long before I wrote the book and will always be a part of me developing stories, I think, and that I recognize certain key things that feel important and that maybe I have to remind myself from time to time, but I'm always asking myself as I develop an idea, like, well, what the same things I would ask another writer, like, are the stakes high enough? Like, my book has 7 elements of a viable story idea. So one of them has to do with stakes being life altering. I mean, I'm always going to be just naturally asking myself that about any idea. Or is the problem difficult and punishing enough, which is another one of the 7, as the main character of a particular story is trying to like solve their problem or reach their goal. Will the character be relatable enough? That's an ongoing question. So I've known those things for a long time and kind of will always, I think, be driven by that. But like in the particular like writing and editing of The Elephant in the Room, one of the things that I was definitely conscious of was character relatability. As a romantic comedy, you really need the audience to bond with both the people and like really like them both and want to see them be together, have pretty warm feelings toward them both. And so that was definitely a challenge, both at the script stage and then as we were editing the movie we shot as well. How do you lean into that? How do you make each character relatable enough, kind of lovable enough, really, even though they have things about them that you might not agree with or think are flaws or whatever traits that, so try to make them palatable for the greatest number of people. It's especially important in that genre. So relatability being one of the elements of my 7 in the book, The Idea, was probably the one that I've spent the most time trying to, work with on this project.
In Erik's book, he uses the acronym PROBLEM to describe what every story needs. Let's take a quick look at the use of the word problem and what each letter stands for in regards to storytelling. You have the letter P for punishing, R for relatable, O for original, B for believable, L for life-altering, E for entertaining, and lastly, M for meaningful. Let's listen to Erik share more about the premise behind his new film, The Elephant in the Room.
So the movie is about a single woman who's lonely after a breakup, maybe around 30-ish, in December 2020, who meets a guy that she might want to date and has chemistry with, but then she finds out that he voted for Trump both times, and she's a like diehard progressive, anti-Trump person, and it's happening during this very tense stage, which the election just happened, that Trump is saying was rigged, and it leads up to the January 6th events in 2021. So the problem in the way of the potential romantic relationship is she cannot deal with his political views, and it's a deal breaker for her. And yet she has chemistry and likes things about him and is attracted to him and even thinks maybe I could impact his views. And she has this housemate who becomes a kind of reluctant advisor in this, who's a housemate she didn't really know, but she's trying to get to know, and he's very not that interested in getting to know her. So it's really the 3 characters. She kind of gets him involved in her like boy drama and wants him to be like the gay best friend kind of character. And he is gay, but he doesn't fit any of the tropes of the gay best friend, which was a like conscious thing I did in the writing. And so, my big thing is you want a problem at the center of the story that the audience cares about its resolution. And usually the main character has a certain goal there that the audience cares about too and shares the goal, right? So the 7 elements in my book, The Idea, spell out the word problem, the acronym problem, right? Because it's all about what the problem is. So in a romantic comedy, the problem is the thing in the way of a relationship that the audience thinks would be a great relationship to have actually work. In other words, you root for the relationship, which means you have to like both people and see that both people would maybe have a good connection and maybe even be life partners and really mean something to each other in a very significant way. You have to really care about that for you to care about the story. So, but then you have to have a problem big enough that it's going to deny that relationship from really, fully taking flight until the very end of the movie, if ever. Right. So that has to be the P in problem is punishing. It has to be punishingly difficult. So, like, for instance, for her, uh, she tries to scratch the surface of his beliefs, and when she hears his views, it makes it that much worse. Or she finds out that his grandmother would like to go to the January 6th rally, stop the steal, and that he's considering taking her to that, that makes it worse. So those are complications. Like, just when I'm starting to like this guy and give in a little, or, something happens that makes it that much harder. So that's the punishing element of problem. The R in problem is relatable, which, like I said, I really wanted to make the audience, regardless of political views, like both characters while believing in them as Trump voter and like progressive. So that was a big part of the writing and editing and directing challenge, was to try to achieve that relatability. You like both people, you connect with them, you identify with them. You mainly have to identify with her because it's more told from her point of view, but you have to like him too and think they could be a good fit. So the O in problem is original. So I think it's an original idea in that we haven't seen a rom-com where the problem is politics, especially not in the Trump era. So that's a fresh kind of pitchable idea, I think. Like, the problem in the way this relationship is that, and it's happening at that time in our history, is the thing that makes it, I think, unique. The B in problem is believable, which is another thing I always have to work hard on, and other writers I work with, I tend to be a stickler on, because writers can feel that it's easy to make an audience believe whatever they write, and it really isn't. You kind of have to convince them, back to the authenticity we talked about, that this is real, like make them suspend disbelief to the point where they get invested, like it's really happening, whatever they're reading or watching. Not an easy thing to do. So, for me, it was making these characters both believable in their politics and believable in their potential attraction for each other. Um, the Ellen problem is for life altering, meaning high enough stakes. And, in a rom-com, the stakes are somebody meets a potential life partner, and that's a high stakes situation, right? If you meet a potential life partner that you may or may not end up with forever, and it could change your life for the better, those are the stakes in a romantic comedy. No one's going to die, so, but that's a high enough stakes for that genre. So, as long as you make the audience care about the relationship and feel that it could be that valuable. And look, I'm not saying I know for sure I achieved any of these, but this is how I was going for and trying to. Life altering stakes. Entertaining is the E in problem, and different genres have different ways they try to entertain. But to me, entertain means make the audience experience emotions that they want to experience, that fit the genre you're writing. So in my case, romantic comedy, there's two emotions. There's the emotion of connecting to a romance on a heart level, and the characters, and feeling for the characters, sympathizing with them when things go wrong. You feel bad when there's a problem in the relationship. You feel bad. The other side is the comedy, make them laugh. And so in this particular project, all three characters are funny, I think. And the dynamic between the female and her housemate is especially funny, I think, because they're both quirky in very different, contrasting ways. And he doesn't really want to get sucked into this whole advising her on this relationship, but he does. And they have their own relationship, burgeoning friendship, that is as important almost in the movie as the potential romance. But it's characterized more by comedy, because the political difference is hard to make just funny all the time, because some of it's very, it's a real dramatic thing in the world and in people's lives, like political polarization, you could say. So there's something that's a little heavy about that at times, even though I treat it in a light way. There's some comedy in that, and then there's much more comedy in the relationship with the housemate. The last of the seven is meaningful. M in problem is meaningful, which means there's something about it that's kind of like sticks to the audience ribs. There's something that's like universal or important, that audiences, not necessarily important, but that audiences can connect with and feel like, wow, I got something out of that, or that explored something in a new way, or it touched on something that's relevant to me in my life in some way. And for me with this, it's this issue of political polarization, which everybody, I think is touched by in some way. Everyone knows someone on the opposite side, or most people are on one side, especially in the Trump era. And it hurts. It hurts in personal relationships. It hurts in just thinking about news and politics when you feel like the other side is this extreme and terrible thing that has power and you don't want them to, whatever side you're on. So hopefully but the way that I deal with it in the movie, I think we've had a lot of screenings where there's really engaged discussion afterwards, that isn't just about the movie. That's kind of people are thinking about this issue in their own lives. So hopefully there's meaning that people can derive from it, makes them think in a different way. It's not like there's a message or I'm saying do this, here's your call to action, or you're supposed to think this or do that. But I do think it naturally brings up things because we can relate as audiences to having people in our lives with those opposite views, and how do you deal with that in a close relationship.
Thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. Here is a complimentary question from our book Story Questions.